People keep asking me how I'm still here, and I tell them the truth, but they don't believe it. Four foods every single day for more than 40 years, and my doctor still shakes his head when he looks at my charts. My name is Margaret Lawson, and I am 98 years old, and no one can quite explain why my body has held on the way it has. I was not always someone people looked at with curiosity. For most of my life, I was invisible in the best way. I raised 3 children in a small house that always smelled faintly of soap and boiled rice. I ironed my husband's shirts on Sunday nights and packed the same lunches Monday through Friday. I worked part-time at the town library shelving books, running my fingers along their spines as if I were greeting old friends. Nothing about me seemed remarkable, and I was content with that. The change began when I was 56. My husband, Daniel, passed away quietly in his sleep one October morning. There was no warning, no long illness to prepare me. One day he was at the kitchen table complaining about the price of coffee. And the next day I was sitting in that same chair, staring at a cup growing cold in my hands. Grief does something strange to the body. Some people stop eating. Some eat without thinking. I found myself standing in front of the refrigerator, not knowing what I wanted or why I had opened it.
For a few months, I lived on toast and tea. My daughter worried. My son tried to bring casseroles. I would take a few bites just to make them feel better, but food had lost its shape and color for me. Then one afternoon, while cleaning out the pantry, I found a small sack of brown rice pushed to the back. Daniel used to say brown rice tasted like cardboard, but I liked the way it felt in my mouth, steady and simple. I cooked a small pot that evening and ate it plain. Something about its warmth settled me. The next day I added steamed spinach, nothing fancy, just washed and placed in a pot with a lid. On the third day, I boiled 2 eggs and sliced one over the rice. I drizzled a little olive oil on top because that was what we had in the cupboard. Brown rice, spinach, eggs, and olive oil. It was not a plan. It was not a diet. It was simply what felt gentle enough for a heart that was bruised. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. I found that when I ate those 4 foods, my stomach did not ache, and my mind felt clear. I slept better. I woke up with a small sense of purpose because I knew exactly what I would prepare. There was comfort in that repetition. When everything else in my life felt uncertain, the rice simmering on the stove was something I could count on. My children thought it was a phase. They would say, "Mama, you can't live on the same thing forever." I would smile and nod, but I kept cooking my rice. I was not trying to prove anything. I simply did not feel the need for more. On Sundays, if the family gathered, I would eat a small portion of whatever was served, but on Monday morning I returned to my bowl. At 65, my doctor first raised his eyebrows. He had run routine blood work and called me in for a conversation. He asked about my diet, and I told him plainly. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Margaret, that's very restrictive." I told him I did not feel restricted. I felt steady. He warned me about deficiencies, about variety, about the importance of different nutrients. I listened carefully. I have always respected doctors, but when the test results came back normal, he had no clear argument left, only concern. So we agreed on something practical. Every 6 months, I would come in for blood work. If anything dipped too low, we would adjust. Year after year, the numbers stayed within range. My blood pressure remained calm. My weight settled at a number that did not change much. My joints, which had begun to complain in my early 60s, quieted down. I walked every morning around the block, then 2 blocks, then 3. People began to notice when I reached 75 and was still climbing the front steps without holding the railing. At 80, I was still reading without thick glasses and tending a small garden behind the house. At 85, my friends from church started to thin out one by one. Funerals became more frequent than birthdays. I would sit in the pew and feel the weight of time pressing gently on my shoulders. And still, each evening, I would wash my rice and set it to cook. It would be easy to say those 4 foods are magic. They are not. Brown rice is humble. Spinach wilts in minutes. Eggs are ordinary. Olive oil is just pressed fruit. There is no secret spice, no expensive supplement. When the doctor says he cannot explain it, I think what he means is that he expected something more dramatic, a superfood from a distant country, a rare herb, but my body has always responded best to what is simple. There were years when I doubted myself. Around 90, I had a fall in the garden and fractured my wrist. In the hospital, a young resident asked me about my diet with a half smile, as if humoring a stubborn grandmother. I wondered, lying in that narrow bed, if perhaps I had been foolish all along. Perhaps variety truly was the missing piece, and I had simply been lucky. Yet even in the hospital, when they brought trays of unfamiliar food, I found myself picking at them and asking my daughter to bring a small container of rice from home. Healing took time, but it came. The bone mended. I returned to my kitchen. I stood again at the stove, watching steam curl up toward the ceiling, and I realized something that had been growing quietly inside me for years. It was not only the food, it was the rhythm. Every morning, I measured 1 cup of rice. I rinsed it under cool water until it ran clear. I placed it in the pot and listened for the first gentle boil. In that routine, I felt grounded. My body learned when to expect nourishment. My mind learned that there would always be something steady waiting. When Daniel was alive, our meals were lively, sometimes chaotic. The children argued over vegetables. He asked for more salt. I rushed between stove and table. After he passed, silence filled the room, and at first it frightened me, but slowly I understood that silence can also be a kind of companion. Sitting alone with my bowl, I began to taste my food more fully. I chewed slowly. I paid attention. I stopped when I was satisfied instead of when the plate was empty. Perhaps that is what the doctor cannot measure. Not just vitamins and minerals, but the absence of stress at the table. No rushing, no overeating, no late-night snacking in front of a glowing screen. Just a simple meal at regular hours. I have eaten breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, and dinner at 5 for decades. My body keeps time better than any clock on the wall. There were temptations, of course. Grandchildren waving slices of cake under my nose, neighbors bringing fried treats during holidays. I did not refuse everything. I tasted. I celebrated, but I never abandoned my base. The 4 foods were my anchor. After a birthday party or a wedding, I would return to them, and my stomach would sigh in relief, as if coming home after a long trip. At 95, when most people expected me to be frail, I surprised even myself. I still dressed without assistance. I still made my bed. I still climbed the small ladder in the pantry to reach the top shelf, though my daughter scolded me for it. During a routine checkup, the doctor looked at my bone density scan and said, "Margaret, this is better than some women 20 years younger." He tapped the paper with his pen and frowned slightly. "I don't fully understand it." I looked at him and felt no pride, only gratitude. I do not claim to have discovered a formula for long life. I have known women who ate carefully and still fell ill. I have known men who drank and smoked and lived into their 90s. The body carries mysteries we may never untangle. But I do know that consistency has been my quiet companion. There's another part of this story that people rarely ask about. After Daniel died, I could have unraveled. I could have let loneliness swallow me. Instead, I built my days around small, dependable acts: cooking rice, watering the plants, walking in the morning light, calling one friend each afternoon. The food was simply the most visible piece of that structure. Underneath it was a decision to keep showing up for my own life, even when it felt smaller than before. Now, at 98, my hands are thinner and my steps slower. I no longer tend the garden myself. A neighbor's son helps with the heavier tasks. I sit more often by the window with a blanket over my knees, but each morning I am still the one who rinses the rice. The sound of water against the grains is familiar as breathing. When I crack an egg against the side of the bowl, I feel connected to every version of myself who has done the same motion for decades. My doctor still runs his tests. He still shakes his head gently and says, "Keep doing whatever you're doing." I smile because I know it is not mysterious. It is just steady. The world has grown louder over the years. There are new diets every season, new rules, new fears about what to eat and what to avoid. I watch it all from my quiet kitchen and feel a certain distance from the noise. If you are waiting for me to tell you that these 4 foods will give you a long life, I cannot promise that. I can only tell you what they gave me. They gave me something to hold on to when everything else slipped away. They gave my days a frame. They gave my body a rhythm it could trust. In that trust, my heart found room to rest. When you reach my age, you begin to see that survival is rarely about grand gestures. It is about small decisions repeated with care. It is about listening to your body instead of the crowd. It is about choosing what feels steady and honoring it, even when others do not understand. I do not know how many mornings I have left to rinse that cup of rice. None of us are given that number in advance. But I know that tomorrow, if I wake up, I will walk into my kitchen, measure the grains, and set the pot on the stove. I will sit at my table, lift the spoon, and taste the simple food that has carried me through grief, through aging, through nearly a century of change.
And as you sit wherever you are, perhaps wondering what the secret might be, I would gently suggest that it may not be a secret at all. It may be the quiet thing you can return to each day, the simple habit that steadies your hands and softens your thoughts. For me, it was 4 humble foods. For you, it may be something else. But find it, hold it close, and let it anchor you the way a small bowl of rice has anchored me for 48 faithful years.